The Bible scholar Christopher Rowland famously noted that this book of unveiling is notoriously the most veiled book in the Bible. It's invited centuries of decoders, and that's where I think we need to get into some Christian, specifically Christian misunderstandings of apocalypse. So, right from the earliest centuries of the church, there have been people who, despite the clear warnings of the book of Revelation itself, and of Jesus too, that that day would come like a thief in the night and no one will know the time or the hour, have attempted to determine the time of the hour and exactly when the thief would come. And it's almost unwittingly hilarious history. According to some historians, church historians have read, Augustine's City of God was actually written to basically blunt the popularity of one particular theory that that day would come in AD 500, right? And of course, the Roman Empire was falling, things were falling apart. It looked pretty apocalyptic, maybe even more so than today. And so that prophecy made a certain kind of sense. And so this kind of landmark in Christian theology, even though from an Anabaptist point of view, we have a couple of quibbles with it, was in a way pointing Christians back to the fact that, no, believe what the good book says. We don't know when that time is coming. A lot of this was tied into this idea of the Great Sabbath, right? That human history was a playing out of 6,000 years, each millennium corresponding to one day of creation, followed by this Sabbath rest, right? And the book of Revelation does, of course, speak of this millennium, this 1,000 years, somewhat in somewhat riddling ways. And so people were consumed with the idea that if we could only identify the date of creation, then we could figure out when the 6,000 years is up. And then we'd know when the millennium is coming and Jesus will return, right? And so this happened in 500 AD. It happened again. Augustine's hints led people to think it would come actually in 801 AD, which is one reason why Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Empire by the Pope in 801 AD. This was, in a way, an inauguration of this millennium. Then, of course, that kind of fell apart. The year 1000 came, and that seemed like a good round number after Jesus' birth, that you'd think that now is time for another millennium. And that didn't work out. So, let's go off of when Jesus died. So 1033 is going to be the new date that we think this thing is going to hit. Of course, there was, Joachim of Fiore famously, worked out a sort of Trinitarian version of this, which was very influential in the Reformation times. And then Bishop Ussher, right, who was a famous, that Anglican divine from the 17th century, I believe, who kind of worked out this whole system of biblical history that some young creationists still held to, maybe still hold to, that the world was created in 4004 BC. It's a fascinating history, and modern-day Christians tend to be a little embarrassed and think, this is just a fringe, this is just sort of a Christian underbelly. I'm not quite so sure. I think this sort of recurrent idea that the millennium is coming and oops, it actually didn't, has probably played a much bigger role in Christian history than we would possibly want to admit. It's a bit embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, but it's also, I think there's an element of it. We're not supposed to date set. We've been told not to date set, and yet we've been told to be ready. And we've been told to, be the, wise virgins who have the lamps ready and so on. And we've been told to sort of get hyped.
And it's very tough to be one of the wise virgins holding the lamp and not look at the clock sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's something that we need to, again, there's a kind of double vision that we need to have. We need to, think, all right, well, maybe it's going to be another 10,000 years. Maybe we are in the early church. Maybe it's going to be another 100,000 years. Maybe, there's a huge amount of actual, stuff that we need to do in order to respond to climate change, because it's actually our responsibility to not screw up the planet you know, because we are going to have to keep living here. Maybe we should be going to the stars. We don't know. What we do know is the kind of the hope that we have doesn't change, no matter how far out it is or how close it is. We know that our own deaths are the mini apocalypses that are going to come a lot sooner than probably a kind of final apocalypse. And we also know that the ethics that Christ calls us to, the way that we're supposed to live in a kind of everyday way, are not ever suspended by the expectation of apocalypse. If anything, the whole vision of living as though today is the last day of the world or the last day of your life should lead us to kind of intensify what we should be doing anyway. There's no out that we get of ordinary love. In fact, ordinary love is kind of given its own proper weight by the realization that it's the point of contact that we have with that eternity.